Hi there. This talk originally was named UpdateUser means nothing to me. And the point about UpdateUser is that it's a kind of a generic way to build stuff, right? Anybody has UpdateUser in the code? Come on, more. We all start like that, right? We do some generic basic CRUD kind of domain, right? Where we store data, we save data, we delete data, whatever, and we build methods on top of them, and then kind of make it work, right? This is how we build our monoliths. And the worst thing about UpdateUser is that it's totally business senseless. There is nothing in there that says what's going to happen when I invoke this message. And usually, this method, sorry. And usually when you start off, it's very clean, right? It does one thing, like takes the data, puts it in database, stores it safely, everything's all right. But then, you know, business rules come in and all that, and we start having if, else, case statement, factories. Yeah, seen that? And UpdateUser becomes a small monolith in itself. 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 lines of code, yeah? And every time a junior developer comes along and wants to fix something, what does he do? Bypasses it, right? He just writes another bit of ugly code somewhere so he doesn't have to risk changing any of the current code. So that is really the topic of this this talk. Usually when we come along and start building our domain, we look at what we need to build, e-commerce, some business app, whatever. We build a lovely database diagram, yeah? And we put all our entities, and we say, this is the user, and this is my billing, and this is the shipping, and here is the product, and here's the product lines, and here are the items, and even we might have, you know, smart stuff like we have an item and an item type, and we have this cross-referential integrity cycle where we have item of items of types of items. Anybody did this? No? I did it once, many, many years ago. So we then add on top of that the relationships. Like we say, okay, if I have a product, the product has some attributes. Those attributes are more entities. Those entities reference each other, and we build this very beautiful, coherent model of our domain. Then, we end up with something like this, right? This account talks to payments, talks to orders, talks to line items, a product again, a user, a customer, and all that, right? Lovely design, right? Perfect, clean. We might end up with something like that, or that. Anybody, is that not the right way to do it? Yeah, cool. Yeah, it's perfect, right? Then we add a data layer, right? Because something has to talk to the database. We're not going to write SQL, right? And then we add some business logic layer and end layers, yeah? So service layers and layers of layers and the whole complexity. We want to do code reuse. We want to have all the fancy frameworks that we heard about, and we build this huge thing. And then we start to build a UI on top of that, and then the problems usually start, right? Everything was so cool when it was just a database, but now we need to have a user that wants to do something. Oh, what are they doing here? I just had a beautiful model. Why do you want to interrupt that? And then we pull in the kitchen sink as well, yeah? Like we need the, you know, all the other things that we didn't think about, integrations and auditing and logging and security and all the other horrible stuff that the business wants. And then they come and say, just one more thing, you know, can we integrate with our CRM? We just want to send an email or something, or maybe integrate with Salesforce. Anybody integrated with Salesforce? 1, 2, 3. Loads of lucky people here in the room. So this is more or less the path of where we get to the big, ugly, well-designed and documented anti-pattern called the big ball of mud, right? Where everything talks to everything. Every time we come to make a change into this model, we pull one thread, and that pulls like 10 threads, and those 10 threads pull 100 threads, and so on and so forth. The database looks horrible. The code even looks even worse, and the application is running slow, and every time we go into production, it takes about, initially when we start, it's like, what, 2 weeks we go to production, right? Then a month, then 2 months, then 3 months, then once a year, because it's so risky and dangerous to put stuff into production. Every change that we make just kills us, that we just have to stop. And then we do what? Who came to his boss in the last six months and said, we'll rewrite? Good number of people, yeah? So you're having fun, right? Please tell me, what are you going to do when you're going to rewrite this big ball of mud? Are you going to redesign? Now you know the domain better, right? So you're going to redesign this better. And then the business, you're going to rewrite, if you succeed, of course, that is. And then you rewrite and you put it out to production, and the business is going to come, just one more thing. What are we going to do 3 years later? We're going to rewrite, yeah? I've done this in a couple of projects. It's a lot of fun. So maybe rewrite is not so great. Maybe we refactor it. But maybe we should redesign it, no? Maybe we should think that this thing with the whole relationship thing and entities and all these layers don't really seem to work, although Microsoft have told us this is the way to do it, and the university told us this is the way to do it. The whole industry says layers and tiers, this is the way to achieve loose coupling. They even came up with service-oriented architecture. I don't know if you know the history of service-oriented architecture, but it started out as web services talking to web services. Anybody familiar with that one? It's great, isn't it? You take all this mess, you distribute it, and then you have them all talk to each other. What are you going to get? A big ball of distributed mud, and when in a monolith it was really easy to find the problem, right? It's one thing, one app domain running. This is a total mess, right? So today we're talking about microservices, right? Who does microservices here? Come on. Everybody does microservices today, right? Who knows how to do microservices? There's one guy here that sits in the room that I know he knows how to, yeah. So those who know how to do microservices are celebrated, but I think it is really early days in this space, and service-oriented architecture has been there for a while, and a lot of people call microservices service-oriented architecture V2, VNext, whatever you want to call it, 3.0, 2.0. But really, those design patterns, those principles that are now implemented as microservices started a long time ago. And it started with DDD and XP and others. Anybody read Evan's book? Anybody started it in the middle? 1, two in the middle? If you started it in the middle and then went to the first part, you'd learn a lot more. Everybody reads the first part and goes to implement. And they don't read the really good bit. So Evans wrote the book. Actually, I'm not sure about the date, but it's somewhere in the 2000s and something. And he says that, we have loads of complexity in software and need to solve it somehow. And same with Martin Fowler. And there seemed to be something good about DDD. So let's explore what's interesting here. One of the basic things about DDD is talking about context. And context is this thing that, you know, when people say when you're in Rome or when you're in Milan, you act like Milanese, right? So you do, you know, you break the red lights, you park on the pavement, you push in the thing, you cut the queue, and you eat lots of spaghetti. I'm joking, I don't know anything about that. But in this context, it's all okay. I mean, this is the way it's acceptable in this context to be how we are in Milan, right? If I take the same context to China or Japan or somewhere else, this is going to be really horrible. Somebody give me a good example of a word that works really well in Italian and is horrible in other countries. No? I don't have a... But that is context. Context is something that brings together where are we coming from and what are we doing and how we see the universe, okay? And how we see things. Boundary is the second concept here. And boundary is about what belongs together. Yeah? So we can take everybody or everything here and walk the walk, and slowly we'll break into groups, people that have the same interests, people that need to do things together, and at a certain stage they will diverge. Yeah? So some of the people will go to do one thing, the others will do another thing. Some like coffee, some hate coffee, some like pizzerias, and the others restaurantes, and so on. So we slowly diverge. The boundary is something that says, you know, this is where this is all the things that belong to me, and I'm very comfortable here, and this is what makes me myself. Or if you talk about technology, this is what I can do, this is what I show that I can do, I can execute on that, and I own that. And if you try to take away something from my boundary, it will break me. Yeah, I don't have anything that I can shed off me. Okay, this is the boundary concept. And when we look at this concept that's called in the book bounded context, then we start to understand that instead of looking at the entities or the user, what the user is doing, what the product is doing, we actually look at what happens in this context. What are we doing? What happens in this context that belongs together, that we can't tear it apart, yeah? So in order to achieve loose coupling, we can think of it as we bring all the things that belong together, make them really tightly coupled, but they're all together, yeah? They will never break, yeah? You can't pull something out of that bounded context and still make this thing work. You might want to add stuff as you go along, but you won't be able to break stuff. You won't be able to create a user, add his email without having the password, right? If you want to authenticate somebody, you have to have those two things. Is that a good example? Yeah? So the other properties of bounded context is the encapsulation. So again, I don't want to show you, I don't want to share anything outside my bounded context. I don't want to be, so if I share stuff, I would usually share a reference. I share an ID with some context. I'll share some information that is relevant to the outside world. But when you look at me from the outside, when you look at the bounded context from the outside, you don't know what I'm doing inside. Yeah? You won't be able to access my database, access my functions, do things, you know, control me. Yeah? I'm responsible for my control. I will do my business logic. You can't force me to do anything. You can ask me to do nicely. But, and that's kind of about encapsulation. And I think that this concept is not new to us, right? Yeah? OO started, what, 20, 30 years ago? We're talking about encapsulation and, you know, open close and principles and all that. So we're in the same kind of space. So let's leave the theory and talk a little bit about how, anybody know what wax on, wax off is? Karate Kid? I love it because it means that, like, just do it and then, give it a lot of thought. Just execute and be, just be brave enough to do what you need to do. And you learn from it and you'll fail many times, but just continue going, yeah? Never stop. So we take the very, very, very basic and very stupid or naive example of building an authentication component, okay? So I need to, somebody comes to my website, he needs to authenticate. He needs to first do what? Create a login, right? So what do I need for that login? A bunch of stuff, but not a lot, right? I need his, whatever is a unique identifier for him, his email, for example, yeah? And I need a password. Do I need to know his first name? I don't need to know his first name. I don't need to know his gender. I don't need to know his communication preferences. I don't need to know where he is from, really. I can, sniff that, but that's a security thing. So I would go and build something that allows me to do that, right? So in that context, what do I have? I need to save the user's credentials, right? So this is my task here. And that's what I'm focusing on. If I try and use that, the fact that I know the user, I have his username and password, do I now need to link it to access control? Does that give me anything? Anyone think here that I need to, that is tightly coupled to access control? To authorize, what am I allowed to see? What am I allowed? Yeah? No? Good. I don't need to teach you anything. I can go home. Can't. So very explicitly, I'm only doing this one thing, okay? And this one thing is very clear. I call it authenticate user, or whatever name I give to this component or function or whatever you want to call it. Is there a process around this? Is there something in this bounded context that needs to maybe retain some memory, do some things? Is there? Yeah? The user comes to the page, he's presented with a form, he now has to submit the form, right? Something now has to happen. Some checks, some validation, some maybe notifications, maybe we want to validate the user's email. Maybe we force him to enter his mobile number because we really want to know this guy is this guy he's talking about, yeah? So maybe I'll have some long-running process here, right? And that is all one bounded context, okay? And if you think about it from a design perspective, that would be like a vertical thing in your application, in your microservice, yeah? If you're doing microservices, and don't catch the micro thing, but that would be a component in your services that knows how to authenticate, to register a user, authenticate him, maybe validate him, all that, all around this thing that then uses a lot of, it could be used later. I would produce a token here and use it in subsequent requests, yeah? So I know this guy is authenticated. And we go on to the next thing, next concept. Again, very simple and very lean and not real world. The account. What does an account mean? What do we do when we have an account? What, is it a bank account? Is it a shopping account? Is it a... We don't know, right? We need to build some understanding. But in an account, we probably need the login ID, so we need some kind of tie it to the who's currently on the page. We want to know some more information about the user because now this user needs to do some stuff that has more context of his user. And for example, we want to know if the account is active or not. So for example, I could take those two things now and look at them and go, okay, I have two components. One allows me to log in and the next allows me to create an account. When I create the account, again, I have a process, right? I could create them in parallel. Is that acceptable? Are they dependent on each other? They are, right? Because I need the user ID here. Somewhere, user login, right? What will I do in this scenario? What would you usually do? Update, create a user in the database, right? And call the get ID thing. I forgot how to do it in SQL today. Do you know what I mean? Yeah? So we get the ID back from database and then we do the next thing, right? What if, when we created the account here, the login, not the account, I generated the ID on a GUID, on the UI? I could do those two things in parallel, right? I could send one message to create the login, authentication and all that, and another message to already prepare the account. I already have some stuff. I can pick up some stuff from another section in the, right? And then when the login is successful and I have authenticated the user, I can publish a little event and tell the account component that it can now activate this account. Does that make sense? So now we have another one. Contact details. They're lovely, aren't they? We always want the contact details and we do very little with it. Sometimes we do some stuff with it. What's the biggest problem with contact details? They're everywhere, right? Every time we have some interaction with the user that has to do with shopping and shipping and invoicing and geolocation, everything, we always come back to this thing, yeah, this contact details. If we want to send him an email, we need the contact details. If we want to send him a fax, we need if we want to send him an SMS, we need the mobile, and so on and so forth. But this is only a conceptual thing. If you put everything in one big component, you're going to constantly try to link to that component. So we can break it down, the contact details, to separate components, or maybe separate components in the same bigger component or service, yeah, that allows us to deal with what we're actually doing. Okay, so we use the email to email, we use SMS for SMSing, we have some communication preferences, but for shipping, for example, where do we store the shipping address? In which component would we store the shipping address? In our contact details? In our shipping component? Maybe in our cart? Maybe, you know, think about it. I'm not going to give you any answers. It's not. But whatever it is, we always have processes around it. You know, it's never this thing like how we started when we're creating this entity and we're updating it. And that, remember that here we talk about fields and not entities, and we're looking at a process. There is something happening with this, and this is the business capability of that component, okay? And we go on to, you know, billing details, payment, and so on and so forth. So it's just to give you a taste. It's not going to, you know, I'm not going to give you here a, you know, I can't teach you everything in 40 minutes, but I think there's a lot that you can kind of, it's a big shift that you can make in order to start finding a good way to decompose what you're doing, okay? And remember that it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. Every iteration that you do, you learn more things and you smooth stuff and you do it again and you destroy it and you do it again. And the benefit is that every time that you destroy it, it's only this one component. Yeah? Does that make sense? So I'm going to take this kind of semantics that we talked about and talk about these vertical components, these things that we talked about. A lot of the time, because we come from entities, we tend to call things early. Yeah? We tend to name them. We say, this is the the customer contact, this is the login component, this is the payment one, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And once we do that, we come back to the context thing. We give it a context. Yeah. And it's very hard to step away from it. So I'd say in the beginning, instead of giving them explicit names as a group, as a grouping, just call it the white service, the yellow service, the red service, Godzilla and things. Star Wars, anyone? Yeah, whatever, you know, these kind of things that just keep the context out of it. Yeah, it allows you to go and say, all these things belong together, but I can't give them a name right now. But as you develop your system, you will find those names very, very, very clearly, because you find the coherence, you find the thing that actually happens. And a lot of the time, you'll be amazed that all the time you look at your domain and you say, oh, there's, you know, like in insurance, you have claims and, you know, house insurance, car insurance, health insurance, life insurance, all that, those insurances. And you look at it and you say, oh, yeah, so I have like an insurance thing, and then I have a claiming thing, right? Because that's what happens. I sell you a policy, and then when you come to claim, so you could think of the domain like that, right? But when you start looking at vertical slices and looking at your business domain, you go, hold on, we don't have claims. Like every time we do a claim, it's totally different for each type, right? So why don't we look at the domain the other way? We look at it, this is my, you know, all my house insurance, that all belongs together. This is all one thing. Yeah, yes, it has a lot of functions inside, but the fact that we claim here and claim here and claim here doesn't mean that, you know, we have a claim service. Does that make sense? It's just, you know, just aspects of looking at stuff. So if we kind of take a next step into the future, we could look into something like those vertical slices having those single tables, and note that there's no referential integrity here whatsoever, yeah? That's not accidental, that is meant to be. So we have, you know, the customer account data and customer details. You know, I might have payment, customer payment details and payment method, two components that belong together, yeah, in the payment space, yeah, this payment service, if you wish. And then I have this customer contact, so again, contact phone and contact address and contact details, each separate components because they do separate things, but they belong together in the purple service. And then we come back to the question asked you before, you know, what do we do with the billing service? Billing address, yeah? Does it belong in any of those services? Guesses? Don't be afraid, I don't bite. And I don't shame people. So, customer billing address is a problem, right? Because you need to find the context where it belongs. And if I were to have a requirement, you know, okay, I need to collect the billing address, then I'd build a component, call it the, what color don't I have here? The red service, yeah? Or the red component, and put this there, right, on its own. And then see what it's pulling, what it pulls as we go along, as we add more features, we add more stuff. You know, where does it pull to, or what pulls into it? Does that make sense? Okay, so try to kind of let go of the paradigm that we are all taught and we all know very, very well, and we live through all our professional lives, and start looking at it from the bounded context, from the things that, what are the functions, the business functions that we're doing. Then reduce this bounded context to the smallest piece that you can kind of coherently say, this is still a cohesive piece of code that does very, very meaningful piece of work. And then, as you collect those little bounded contexts, find the services, find the boundaries where they belong, okay? as we look at coupling and all that, you want to see kind of a very loosely coupled on the top, on the outer space. Yeah, the overall system should be very loosely coupled, but when, as we said before, inside the bounded context, inside the services where they're close to each other, we totally expect tight coupling. Again, if we kind of break it down to small pieces, then it is okay to have this kind of coupling, yeah, because it's easy to fix and it's easy to just throw away and famously rewrite, right? So we just go like, we don't kill the API, we just rewrite the function and everything's fine, or whatever it is we're doing. Yeah? One aspect that needs to be really kind of respected here, and it's really important when you look at the data, is that the data belongs to only one logical component in the system. So only one component in the system can go in and make any changes, and I'm talking about state changes, I'm not talking about reading, state changes to the logging component. So only the component that's responsible to create a login or to validate a login or whatever it is, it's the only one that can change this, this specific piece of data. Once you start sharing your data, you're done. That's the end of it, yeah? You're down, you can just go home and forget about it. So really, really kind of be focused on the idea that if I have a piece of data in the system, the whole system, there is only one place where I can actually modify that data. So of course we come into the problems, right? What happens when we have a website and we have a page and we have like loads of data here and that comes from, many, many, many places in our system. Does that make sense? Yeah? So we have things that are, the likes of Amazon and Google probably use this kind of, eBay use this kind of UI composition concept, yeah? Where you have those boxes, and all those boxes are really widgets. So you have your shopping cart is a widget, and the checkout is a widget, and this is the product and the suggestions. All of them are all widgets that are vertically sliced to their thing, to whatever they're doing. And on the UI, they use their own frameworks inside the UI to kind of correlate them. Yeah. So we have all kind of concepts like UI composition, and that is very much like API composition could be the same thing, right? So I could have an API that exposes a coarse grind kind of API for writing and coarse grind API for reading, and they provide data for each of my components but I aggregate them, I hide the aggregation from my customers, okay? I don't have time to talk about read view models, but think about it that every bit of your bounded contexts really own their own data, and effectively they don't really need to share it. The only thing that's really important for us is when state changes, what is the thing that the business are going to ask about, right? What is my new state? And that's what I want to publish, right? That's what I want to keep there, yeah? That this is the data that the business will care about, and all the other components in the system will care about, yeah? So think about it, that your internal state is really meaningless to the outside world. What's important is the events or the things that happen that are state change meaningful, yeah? So if I just paid something or I just bought something, there somewhere is going to be +1, right? The stock is going to go -1. The thing, all these pieces of data, they are the important ones. So explore this kind of thinking of going back to the OLTP. Anybody did OLTP and all up? No. Anyway, back in the day, we used to do this as, this was the way to kind of avoid some business person running a report and crashing the whole system. Because, you know the answer. So, bounded context, do verticals, and please, 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 let go of your entities and think about fields. Think about things that are the properties that are important to the bounded context, and forget fields, forget entities. If you're doing microservices, if you take one thing from this talk, please don't do synchronous communication for, state changes between microservices. Don't do this, okay? Please, please, please don't. If you don't know why, come back to me, okay? This is like seriously going back to SOA 0.1 or whatever it was. And if, if you look at the overall kind of code, the best principles, best practices, whatever you want to call it, CQS, SRP, clean code, all the things that we all know, they apply here, yeah? So everything about single responsibility principles, keeping your boundaries clean, keeping your code clean, putting the right things in the right place. And it won't be perfect, and please accept it, give yourself, love yourself, think, I'm going to win, do it again and again, and don't let anyone shame you for that. And one quick plug-in here, if you're interested to know a little bit more, click this link and you could see a partial thing from Udi Dahan's distributed systems design. Thank you very much.
Hello.